Hi, welcome back to the next episode of the Keto Naturopath on YouTube. Today we're going to talk about how to break a weight loss stall, a fat loss stall that happens both on keto and carnivores. It happens for everybody, but I think we can address that, and I think we can make an effective change for anybody who really wants to have this happen. We're going to talk about some underlying factors that are true to pretty much all the situations, how to address them, and how to move on. And the tool that we're going to be using, of course, is Precision PSMF. Protein sparing modified fast. That's what we're calling it from now on. Okay. Why would you want to do a precision protein sparing modified fast in the first place? Well, it's not going to be curiosity, by the way. It's going to be you're driven to this because you have some particular acute need to change something in yourself. You might be thinking health, which I think is a good place to start. In fact, it's probably the best one. Mostly it's about fat. Mostly it's about weight loss. Mostly it's about fat loss specifically. That's no surprise. Okay, the other reason is you want to choose something that's effective over hype. Everything is hyped. Every particular diet is hyped. I don't think that their protein sparing modified fast is not my definition. It's a concept, and I'm showing you how we do it. So in that sense, I'm bringing myself to this concept to show you, but it is not my thing. So if you're doing keto, especially low carb, high fat, or carnivore, or intermittent fasting, time restricted eating, and that's a big question that comes up all the time. Well, what about IF? What about IF with protein sparing modified fast? I've addressed that in an entirely different video, and I'll put that up here. When people talk about intermittent fasting or time restricted eating, it's really about carbs they're talking about. They restrict the time allotment for carbs. Since we're not talking about carbs, when we talk about protein sparing modified fast, we are not talking about carbs. Carbs are not only we're not talking about it, we're not doing carbs. So it's irrelevant. So that's kind of the simple answer. But in terms of graphical comparisons, go to the video that I referred to up in the upper right-hand corner. Here's the what I consider the overwhelming prerequisite for anybody's to consider weight loss, assuming they have weight to lose. So if you have excess fat, and obviously you'll know that, these are what I consider the prerequisites. 3 metabolic steps required for permanent sustainable weight loss. Did you hear about the permanent sustainable weight loss? It's true. I call it the yellow brick road for restoring metabolic health. You can call it a weight loss plan. Really, they are the 3 universal prerequisites to weight loss, regardless whether you're in Jakarta, Beijing, Tasmania, Oslo, New York City, Avon, Connecticut. Step 1 is you stop all processed foods. All processed foods. I didn't say carbs in this particular case. I said processed foods. Processed foods. You really need to nail this in your mind. And here's why. I've been saying this for 20 years, and clearly a lot of people go, well, what about this? What if I'm just doing a little bit? Get rid of it. Get the idea out. And yeah, you can make some exceptions. And for anybody who's been following us, our exceptions, there really aren't any exceptions. We make our own ice cream. Judy makes her own ice cream, and so we do dairy maybe twice a year. She makes coconut ice cream maybe once every couple months. So that's our processed food. What else would be processed? But it's primarily we just don't do processed foods. And we're not doing it to set an example to anybody. We are not here to sell you anything. We are here to sell ourselves on improved health, which I think we've garnered over the last 8 years, I believe, if I have to go back and count. And I think it's been an incredible journey. That's why we're doing it. So I'm not here to sell you anything. I'm here to show you that it works. And I had to go back and do the research and saying, why is this so powerful? This is why it's so powerful. Step 1, you stop the processed foods. There is no sort of niggling about it. When people come into one of our programs and I ask them to track their foods, I get to see what they're actually eating. And they all go, well, I had a bad day. I had a bad day. No, and that's fine. Bad day, good day, cheat days, whatever you want to call it. It means you're not that motivated to make a change. And I get that. Why would you be motivated? If you don't have a problem, then you're not going to be motivated. So just to start this out of some sort of curious period, it's not going to work. You need to be driven by something deeper. You need to be driven by some realization that you want to be healthier, realization you want to drop that fat. If that's not happening with you and that's not in you, why bother with any of this? Absolutely. Drop the processed foods. Okay, there are no cheat days with processed foods. I really hate the term. Oh, I had a cheat day. I had, what are these, malted chocolate balls or donuts or whatever it is. There are no cheat days. You just don't do this. If you want to be healthier, you don't do this. I can't say it any other way. And I see that it comes back again and again and again. We have a $50 for 1 month program for a protein sparing modified fast. After that, it's $10 a month if you want to stay in our group, and you don't have to. But for that, we were very explicit what you need to do. We have videos and so on, and now we're doing YouTube, so it's all over the place in terms of what we represent. And yet they're still asking, well, can I have this and that? That you can have whatever you want to have. These are not my rules. This is by saying, if you want to get healthier, if you want to drop your fat, these are the things that you will do. So to negotiate on the other end of like, no, it's a little bit too harsh, by all means, do whatever you'd like to do. I'm showing you what works for the majority of people. The reason processed foods are such an issue, and 70 years ago, pre the 1950s for the most part, it didn't exist that much. There was donuts and there was pastries and so on, and that is processed food. Correct, good for you. But it's not the degree of scientifically, industrially planned, engineered processed food that exists today. This is a terrible plague upon our population. It is so saturated with chemicals that didn't exist 70 years ago to make it so you need to come back for another mouthful, another handful, another plateful. It is made for you to be driven to want this all the time. You are surrounded by these particular ads. Sorry, it's called the food industrial complex. So in the 1980s is really what happened, is when the tobacco companies bought the food manufacturing companies and became the food industrial complex, in my view. Those are my words, by the way. And so here's just a graph of that to give you some understanding that in part, this isn't your fault. If you just sort of were eating what everybody else was eating, none of this is your fault. You've been a victim of television advertising, of radio advertising, of all the flashy colors when you're a little kid going into the aisles of the cereals and the potato chips. And so it happened to you. I understand that. But now I'm talking to the adult that is in there someplace that says, I got to find out why this is happening. And it is this. I'm not going to go through chemical by chemical. I'm going to say this is an inflection that happened in the late 70s, early 80s. And after that, our food supply, and you can see the numbers, rose. It's not that obesity did not exist in the 60s or the 50s. They did. They even existed in 1860 when William Banting first wrote down the diet that he was advised to by his doctor, Dr. Harvey. So Dr. Harvey came up with it and said, you need to drop the carbs, and gave him a plan. He was the undertaker for the royal family. So he was the guy that made all these coffins and so on and so forth. He was a carpenter in essence, but an undertaker of coffin making. And so he then took the plan and made a little booklet, and it went through something like 70 editions of it. So that's in the 1860s. The classic ketogenic diet didn't start until really 1925. It was conceived in 1921, and it was at the Mayo Clinic. So anyway, this is where it started. Clearly, obesity did exist. If anybody seen pictures of the Romans, they loved being heavy and fat. Supposedly, it was a sign of affluence and all those other things. Times have changed a little bit, but the foods that they got fat on were probably high carbs. There were probably pastries of whatever extent that they had, but it was not industrial oils. It did not have all these chemicals. So there's a whole level difference, and it's hard to say how unhealthy their heaviness was. Everybody who's heavy is not necessarily unhealthy. It's a stress on their heart, so there is that. But that's the interesting thing about obesity, is that it's not everybody's unhealthy. Most people are, though. And we now throw chemicals into it, so it gets to be a whole nother level of problems for these people. The other thing is, it's the addiction. Absolutely, it's the addiction. So you can't just say carb addiction. It's ultra processed food addiction. Ultra processed food addiction. Here's an image I put together. It said, you were given an addiction to the chemicals in the processed foods. Tobacco company. Tobacco did this when they took over the processed food industry in the 1980s. Does this reduce your self-blame? It's just the reality, and I'm asking you to respond to it. I'm asking you to grab yourself by your bootstraps, shoelaces, and to realize you have to deal with it. It's unfortunate that the world changed in 70 years. And here's a quote by, if you know John Prime, who recently died in the last couple of years, actually. There's a hole in Daddy's arm where all the money goes. A great song. And that's true. That's about addiction. Here's a guy that from The Guardian, BBC in the UK a couple of years ago, he spent a month just eating processed food. And he talks about his experience of that. In fact, I am going to go to show you a little bit of that and just a tad more on processed foods. You got to get this point and you have to realize it's an irrevocable point. It's not going to change. And it is so obvious. It's a little bit like saying water is wet in the sense that there is no alternative. There's no rebuttal. There's no argument against it. It's the reality we live in. And now it's up to you to take this reality and step away from it so you get healthier. Should you want to be healthier? Should you want to drop the extra fat if you feel you have extra fat to lose? Okay, so here we are on the internet, and this is that article I was telling you about from the BBC. This is the guy who for a month just ate ultra-processed food. He talks about his experience, and there's ultra-processed foods. He talks about the weight he gained. He talks about neurologically felt impaired, how he felt older, how he felt depressed, and on and on. Feel free to read that. And I put the link already in that last slide that you saw. And also I want to slide over to PubMed, and here's some more studies that are very straightforward. Ultra-processed diets cause excess calorie intake. So did you get that? Ultra-processed diets cause excess caloric intake and weight gain in inpatient randomized control styles of ad libitum food intake. So that was that's 2019, just 2 years ago, a year and a half ago. And there's associated articles with this, if, da-da-da-da. Okay, so knowing that it's very current, it's being very studied, and the conclusions are all the same, those that are not financially sponsored by the food industrial complex. Okay, so here's that link to that particular article. Here's the person who did that, and you can really dive in and find out what happened when I ate ultra-processed food for a month, et cetera, et cetera. And that was just 80% ultra-processed foods. Here's another study on that. I'm not going to go too deep on this because I've hit it in a number of other videos. Weight gain, processed versus unprocessed foods. You can see the processed food, they gain weight. The unprocessed food, they didn't. And who did this study? Well, this is actually by the government. Who knew, right? So ultra-processed diet leads to extra calories and weight gain. So now they got that out of the way. So basically, if you're coming from keto or carnivore, you have some choices to make. You have a fork in the road that you're on the right path going forward, and clearly, and if you're on processed foods, you really have to think about this as an issue. Do not think about, well, how can I cheat my way around it? What's the biohack in which I can avoid all the work that previous many thousands and millions of years of evolutionary existence and data confirms? But how can you walk around it and not have to do all that? I don't know, but there's a lot of people out there that want the next biohack so they can buy that supplement or they can buy another processed food. Most people are thinking, well, I'll do protein powders because protein powders are the best way to lose weight. No, it's not the best way. In fact, you can use and damage yourself very well on protein powders if that's you think is your escape route here, and that's how you're going to be implementing a protein-sparing modified fast. I've mentioned that in a number of videos as well. Step 2. Low carb, high fat, moderate protein. So low carb, high fat, ketogenic diet, which is what I'm advocating for. So I think you ought to slide from dropping processed foods now into keto, and we're temporarily going to go into a higher level of fat. Why are we doing that? Because we really want your body, your metabolism to really figure out what to do with fats. We're not smothering you in fats, but we're having some high fat, and you're going to become fat adapted, I believe, more quickly than if you didn't do that. So we're doing low carb or no carb, that's up to you. But usually when people are coming from fairly high processed foods, they need to have some carb. It's too much of a change for them to go from a lot to none. We're not asking for failure. We're asking for gradual improvement over time. That's the goal here. And then something sustainable for the rest of your life that you get, that you like, and you enjoy. That's the whole point. You have to become fat adapted at some point. This means dropping your carbs to whole food sources, if not entirely. leafy green vegetables only, if at all. I haven't done, every so often I'll do some salad if I'm out, but we used to have huge gardens, and now we just have an herb garden. Increase your fats and proteins. Increase your fats and proteins from where you were. From where you were. Okay, so now the question becomes what fats to add? Don't add them. And so my answer is don't add them. Just have the fats that come with your protein sources. Right now, our whole food sources of protein have fat and protein. Gosh, that's the way nature meant it. Have the fat that comes with your protein, and you're off and away, whether that's poultry or meat or chicken, poultry, meat, or fish. Step 3, protein sparing modified fast. What do we have? Lean meats, poultry, and fish. Surprise, that's all there is. You can have, that's a salmon, so that's a fatty fish. How to do a precision protein sparing modified fast. PSMF. Okay, short answer. Have to have the required amount of protein per day. We'll show you how to do that. You have to break it up into 4 portions throughout the day. That's ideal. Ideally, 4 portions throughout the day. They don't have to be equal portions. They can be mostly in dinner and some, but spreading it out is better than all at once. You choose. Okay, more specific answer. Calculate your daily protein requirement based on your height and ideal body weight. Second, your protein should be lean, whole food sources of protein, meat, poultry, fish. Required amount of daily protein is based on your ideal body weight. This is only a reference, not telling you that you should weigh this amount. Okay, we're going to look into that in just a second. Like now, so for men, I did every other inch. I didn't do every inch, but you can make up your own chart as well. If you go on to Google and you go ideal body weight, you'll see there's 3 or 4. They're all within a pound. So this is not rocket science. The information is out there. So you don't get more protein just because you're a bigger guy. All right. And if you're half this, you still need to have this. So if you're half this, obviously you're way under muscled, you need to have this much protein per day. This is key. It is key and it is crucial. So if you have this protein first, in the sense that's the highest priority that you consume in the course of a day, then other appetites just go away. So that's all I'm after is your ideal body weight, because I use that to calculate, or you will use that to calculate how much protein you need to have per day. And for women, there you go. Here's one. I just chose 5'4". It's 5'4" woman. So do not go, I'm a 5'4" woman and I weigh 100 pounds or I weigh 180 pounds. I really don't care what you weigh. I'm using this as a number to calculate how much protein you need to have per day. You get, well, I'm a 74-year-old woman or I'm a 24-year-old woman. Yeah, there's a slight difference. It's not enough of a calculation. I've already been through all that. Just take it and do it. So the percent of protein in a diet versus calories. So what happens when you start having more protein, and it's only up to 70%, nobody gets that high. When you start adding more whole food sources of protein in your diet, your appetite kind of dissipates. You're less hungry. So what is happening here? More protein across the bottom, you consume fewer calories. You can look at it the other way as well, is that the more carbohydrates you have, you can overeat your amount that you require in the terms of calories per day. So that's how you get fat. That's how you get heavy. That's how you become obese. Here's another way of looking at that. There we have therapeutic keto. So this is a classic ketogenic diet. Nutritional keto, which is a little bit more protein. Low carb, high fat, which is a little more protein. Still not a lot. Low carb fat loss, which is now far fewer carbs. And now it's protein sparing modified fast, which has the highest amount of protein. And yet there's still a good chunk of fats that you can have. There's no such thing as a natural combination of fats and carbs. There's no such thing as a natural combination of fats and carbs. And if somebody goes, oh, what about the avocado? Yeah, avocado has a little bit of carbs and it's mostly fat. But there isn't any example. A natural combination of natural combination of protein and carbs. Those combinations of protein and carbs and fat and carbs are called ultra-processed foods. So this is an example. All right, so those are corn dogs. If you think that's all protein in the center and that's carbs in the outside, that's partly true. This is just by itself is a carb, protein, and a little bit of fat combination. And over here, this is fats and carbs. Of course, it's pizza and so on and so forth. And people say, well, I see there's tomato on there. I see looks like a little pepper on there. Yeah, let's just take it for what it's worth. There's a lot of fat and there's a lot of contrived carbohydrates in there. It's a pizza. We all love pizza for the reasons that it's engineered, but also if there's cheese on there, which I assume there is, casein's highly addictive, and so is gluten, which I'm assuming there's some real gluten in there someplace. Okay, here's the other thing. Dividing up your protein into multiple portions throughout the day. 4 ideally. Nobody eats this way in 4 even allotments. You could, and it'd be great. It'd be very healthy. That means you're doing exercise as well. I'm not getting into that right now. I've covered that in other videos as well. You might want to look into, but spreading it out through the day, it basically is about muscle mass. Here's what happens as we get older in this culture and what's happened in the last 70 years. Because we went, everything was low fat. Well, fat came with protein. That was the natural sources of fat came with protein. Well, people then started eating less protein over the last 70 years. They had less muscle mass, except for those who work out and so on and so forth. That's a separate category. But what happens, they were under muscled, they were kind of sarcopenic at a very early age. When you are sarcopenic, if you have low muscle mass, you have a lower appetite. Your muscle is where you burn your calories, not just when you're working out, but to keep your body going. And if you don't have the muscles, you're not going to be able to burn the calories. And so they're eating less protein, so they have less muscle, so they have less appetite. So now when they're in their 50s and 60s and 70s and 80s, they really have an issue that's harder to turn that ship around to suddenly saying, hey, mom and dad, we need to have more protein. And why don't we throw in a little working out? But ideally is you do your calculated amount of protein. We've been there, and you eat it 4 times a day. Have some in the morning and spread it out. You will see that it's as much as you're going, it's unnatural for me to have chicken or steak or whatever it is in the morning. Well, get used to it and you'll see that it will be quite fine and you'll enjoy it. That's how we lived for many a millennia. Okay, anabolic resistance. Anabolic resistance of muscle protein and aging is kind of what I just told you about. We had less muscle, we have less because we ate less, we worked out less, and we ate less protein. And so consequently, we don't have much left. And so to change that around, that there's an anabolic resistance, that means a resistance to building things up. The opposite of anabolic is catabolic, which is breaking things down. So this anabolic resistance, which is a term they use as you're getting older, can be turned around, but it has to do with, one, getting the appropriate amount of protein per day. We've got that calculation, and breaking it up into separate eating times, separate eating events. And if you can add working out in there, you've really changed your life. But if you don't do any of those things and you kind of flow along what everybody else is doing, you're going to get what everybody else has gotten. Okay, here's some examples. I'm not going to go into it. I've done other videos on this. 4 things you need to do to calculate. We've already been through 3 of them. Here's some examples. All right, say 3.5 ounce grilled skinless chicken breast is 30 grams of protein. So don't confuse, this came up in our Facebook group, don't confuse the weight of the thing you're weighing with how much protein is in. There's a lot of water in that, and there's a lot of fat in that. That's raw, by the way, and we don't weigh things raw. That's an unusual, you can look up on a number of trackers to say what is cooked, grilled, however you want to, this would be what is cooked skinless chicken breast. And that will give you that. So you don't have to go, oh, I'm weighing it before and after, and what's the difference between the two? You don't have to do any of those shenanigans. Just look it up. We use Cronometer, and you can use 10 other different things. So there you go. So that's ounces or grams, but now you know how much protein. So ideally, you need to have a quarter of whatever it is you're needed. So if I need 162, divide that by 4, it's 80, it's 40. So if I was to have 4 even eating times, that would be 40 grams per day. And you can figure it out for yourself. Okay, so why does a precision protein sparing modified fast work? Well, here's why. It works because it's basically hypocaloric. Let's go back to this particular screen here. Here's the protein, there's your fat. As we eat more protein, our calories go down. So if we are now at 50% protein in our diet, we are eating about, and this isn't the perfect chart, we're eating about 20 to 30% fewer calories below our basal metabolic rate on a daily basis. So we then start losing weight. So we're losing weight, which means we're burning our own fat. We've already been fat adapted. That was step 2. Now we're starting to burn some of that off. And as we go forward, you get to your, however you want to look, we'll call it the ideal image weight for you. Once you achieve that, you'll find that your appetite will go to wherever it needs to go. You're not going to be permanently, oh, I'm eating protein, so I'm not hungry anymore. You'll be as hungry as you need to be hungry. Really, your body doesn't work against itself. But if it doesn't need to work that hard, if you're already carrying all these extra calories, you need to cover the important things. And the only required macro really is protein for your muscle and your enzymes and your immune system. And then secondarily fat, of course, but that comes with the natural sources of protein. All right, go do it. So that's why this is so effective. Talk to you next time.